All right, no problem.
Okay.
Yes. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our 5th session of Thrive here in the Madison School District. We're so glad you could join us this evening. We have our special guest here, Shane Watson from Not My Kid, and we'd like to give everyone a warm welcome and a reminder what Thrive stands for. Thrive stands for together, healthy, resilient, informed, values aligned, and empowered. I'm Dr. Michelle Wilson. I serve in the Student Services Department in Madison School District, and it's my honor to serve and be here this evening with this esteemed panel. You may remember our moderator who's here at every event. That's Katie McPherson. Katie, you want to say good evening?
Good evening. Thanks for being here.
And also we have Edie Dolan here, who is our Director of Student Services. Edie, do you want to give a few remarks?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so thrilled you're here.
I just want to take a minute for those who are joining us for the first time, just to give the background of our moderator and our guest this evening, Shane Watson, who's here from Not My Kid. First, I just want to give a little background for Katie, who's been our moderator throughout all of our Thrive sessions. For those of you who are here, who are joining us this evening, or who may be logging on to our YouTube and watching us later on. So first, I want to give you Katie's background. Katie brings experience in school leadership, prevention, and organizational change with 25 years as a secondary school teacher, guidance counselor, and K-12 administrator. Katie currently serves as a regional sales manager and director for professional development for Bark for Schools. Bark for Schools is an artificial intelligence app that protects over 5 million children nationwide. Also, she is a national public speaker on youth mental health and suicide prevention. Katie serves as the Town of Gilbert, Arizona, One Gilbert Youth Mental Health Task Force lead chair, and in her spare time, she's the mother of 4 teenage daughters. Listen to these ages: 15, 14, 13, and 13. So, Katie, welcome, and we're so glad to have you here this evening.
Thanks so much.
Also, I want to introduce Shane Watson. And Shane, I'm so happy you can be here this evening with our community. Before we started and went on live today, I was sharing, I've seen you many times before and had you in other districts that I've served in. And I'm just pleased that you can be here this evening and answer any questions that our community may have. Katie will share how we can get those questions in. And I just want to share a little bit about your background as well. Shane serves as an expert consultant and adult educator for Not My Kid, after having served 9 successful years as the organization's PIO, or Public Information Officer. He's the host of Win This Year podcast and prevention specialist. Shane first joined Not My Kid in 2013, and during his time with the organization, he has performed over 600 speaking engagements to an audience of over 100,000 participants. He also made over 100 local and national media appearances, including TV interviews on the Today Show, Good Day, New York, and Kansas City Live. Additionally, Shane serves as a lead facilitator on sessions of Not My Kids' early intervention program, which is called Project Rewind. Shane, we are so glad. Did I leave anything off on that background, or anything you'd like to add? Because we're thrilled to have you this evening.
Thank you so much. No, I'll actually tell you a little bit more about myself in a minute, but that sounded very complete. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I have seen not all 100,000, I've been in the audience of many times to see you present, and it's been my pleasure. Katie, do you want to just give like some housekeeping? I know we've got our audience live here tonight on YouTube. If a parent wants to send in a question, this is a serious topic tonight on our 5th session, which of course is vaping and substance abuse experimentation. So I know there are going to be questions coming in. How do our parents get to send questions in tonight, and any other housekeeping we have for tonight's program?
Sure. We're using an app called Slido, SLI.do. So if you go to sli.do.com, you can log in there and it will ask you for a code. Our code tonight is 047589. That's 7589, you'll see that it says Shane wants an event. You can text in any feedback, any statements, but also questions as well. We'll be checking those at the end of the presentation that Shane gives tonight. So you can either be anonymous to do that, or you can put your name in, whichever way you want. For those of you that may be watching after the broadcast, Shane will be giving us some resources as well as his contact information. So if you watch after the broadcast and you want to get in touch with Shane, he will have his contact information as well at the end of our presentation. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you. So just since we start, I know we put right on our announcement on vaping. So I'd like to kind of ask you, Shane, how do you think we got here with this really epidemic of, as described in public health with vaping?
Well, it's, it played out somewhat similar to the epidemic of smoking with teens in the 70s and the 80s, the 90s. It's a lot of the same familiar faces. A lot of the big tobacco corporations that got our generation, our parents, our grandparents' generation hooked on nicotine are back with new nicotine containing products. They have a new target market. It's our kids. And it's the same industry that very successfully fooled America as a whole once before. They're back now. They're using very sly marketing tactics. They're creating devices that are very sleek looking, very interesting, very appealing to kids, including flavors that are appealing to kids, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And they are focusing on people who weren't alive when we went through this battle, the American public versus the tobacco industry, in prior decades. These kids, unless we've had a dialogue with our kids specifically about this, they're not familiar with this. So it's like that old adage, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So I think that that's how we got to where we're at and why we need to have this conversation.
I'm going to turn the rest of the program over to you and Katie, and I'll be back at the end. Thank you for that insight.
Thank you so much. Katie, is it all right? Would you like me to get started?
Yes, and I am going to turn off my video. It's all you, and then we'll be back. Thanks so much.
That sounds good. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your time with me. Thank you to Madison Elementary School District for creating this opportunity, and for all of you for choosing to share some of your evening with us. My name is Shane Watson. As mentioned previously, I'm an adult educator for Not My Kid. I've been with the organization 9 years, and as was mentioned, have done over 600 speaking engagements for the organization. I am passionate about youth mental health and prevention, and hopefully that's evident by the time we're done with our conversation here tonight. In addition to the staff duties I did for Not My Kid for a number of years, I educate on close to about 10 different youth mental health topics, and one of them is substance use. My connection to the topic of substance use has three very distinct parts. First is professionally through my work with the organization. Out of the 9 years I've been with Not My Kid, I've educated on substance use all 9 years, but 5 of those 9 years, I have facilitated an early intervention program called Project Rewind, where we help middle school and high school students who are dealing with mild to moderate substance use issues. They're past the point of prevention. They've begun experimenting, but they're not so far down that path that they require, for example, a residential rehab stay. My second connection to the topic of substance use is a very personal one. I am in long-term recovery now, 10 plus years clean and sober. And I went from being a kid that got straight A's, played sports, on paper looked like a healthy kid, growing up in a home with amazing parents, going to wonderful schools. I went from being that person to someone who struggled with substance use for close to 2 decades, struggled with alcohol, methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, prescription drug misuse. And as a result of the decisions I made under the influence of drugs and alcohol, was incarcerated twice, nearly lost my life. And as a result of the last night that I drank or used, November 28th, 2011, found myself looking at the possibility of a 3 to 5 year prison sentence and ended up as a convicted felon. So this topic had a very profound effect on my life. And my third and final connection to this topic is what drives me the most. Like many of you watching this, I am a parent. I'm the very proud dad of an amazing young lady. And I not only want to equip my family with the tools, the knowledge, and the resources to prevent or intervene in these challenges, I want to do the same for you. Prevention works. We have seen the positive effect of it in families that we've worked with, in schools that we've spoken at, in community groups we've reached, etc. If you're not familiar with Not My Kid, we were founded 22 years ago based out of one Scottsdale family's personal challenge related to a behavioral health issue with their own son. Debbie and Steve Moak of Scottsdale had a son that was a scholar, an athlete, a student leader. And they didn't realize that he was struggling with substance use issues until he was in the grips of full-blown addiction. They got him help, got him on the road to recovery. He's doing fantastic today, but they felt like their job wasn't done. They said, okay, we've addressed our family's issues, but how many families out there are in the same boat we were in, that love their kids, that spend time with them, and still are caught off guard by what's going on in their own home? So you can see at the top of that left-hand column, we were founded around that flagship topic of substance use, and we've since expanded out to include everything that you see here on the screen for two main reasons. We educate on all of these for reason number one, that these challenges like bullying or depression, self-injury, suicidal thoughts, there is not a middle school or a high school that you can walk into where those aren't a reality. That's truth. That's life in 2022. The second reason we educate on all of these is we've learned they're very often interconnected. Very frequently, when we meet a young person that's struggling with one of these, they're struggling with another one, or they are at greater risk to struggle with another one. And in educating on these topics, we want to reach you, the adults, parents, grandparents, guardians, educators, and then we also speak to the youth, because if we're only educating one of the two groups, we're doing half the job. But if we can educate both groups and get everyone empowered, working together on the same page, that is how we create change. And we are now a organization that offers the full continuum of mental and behavioral health care and wellness programs beyond our prevention education, which you're seeing here tonight. We have an early intervention program, as mentioned previously, Project Rewind. We are licensed by the state of Arizona to provide outpatient treatment, doing individual, family, and group counseling. And as of last November, we launched our Inspired Peer Support program. Now, as we're quoting statistics or percentages or information tonight, if you're wondering, as you hear these stats and these studies that we're talking about, and you're wondering, is this coming from somewhere reputable? Where is this coming from? The answers are right here on your screen. These are the primary sources we used for the dialogue that we are going to be having here tonight. And one more thing that's going to set the tone for our conversation is what you see right here. I mentioned our early intervention program, Project Rewind. We have a number of schools and districts that refer their students to us as almost like a diversion program. If their kids get caught on campus with drugs or paraphernalia, or they're under the influence, we want to be able to reach them with that early intervention program. Well, when they get referred from their school, or if their parents are just self-referring, we ask what substances are being used. And if you look at these top two right here, 51% for marijuana, which, by the way, the kids that we're meeting aren't smoking marijuana so much anymore, as they are vaping THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, the active ingredient in marijuana responsible for the high that they're trying to get, but responsible for the damage to the developing brain. So primarily, they are vaping THC now, and that accounts for 51% of our referrals. And then vaping nicotine accounts for 32%. So if you look at this, 83% are vaping one substance or another. By the way, let me back up for 1 second. Take a look at that bottom one, prescription drugs at 3%. I will tell you right now, to me, based on my experience, that number is low. Keep in mind, these are the referral rates of the substances where their family or their school is aware that they are using them. Sometimes we get kids referred for one thing and there's more going on than their family and or their school realized. So let's talk about the when and the why. What do you think is the average age that kids in the United States first begin using drugs or alcohol? Your options are 8 to 10, 11 to 13, 14 to 16, or 17 to 19. If you want to put it in the chat box, you can. If you want to submit it to us later, you want to answer with those that you're watching this with, go right ahead. And if your answer was 11 to 13, you are correct. That is the average age that kids begin experimenting with drugs or alcohol in the United States. In order to be truly preventative, we need to have those conversations with our kids before they reach those years, before they've started hearing things from peers, from social media, from pop culture that may not be correct and may not be true. You might be shocked at what a 10, 9, or 8-year-old child has already heard about drugs and alcohol from the aforementioned social media, pop culture, or from their peers. We may think to ourselves, no, that's too early to begin that conversation, but you know what? Ask some questions and find out what they already know. It's one of the best ways to begin that dialogue is ask some questions, sit back, and just listen. Now, what about people who did go on to go down the path of addiction or alcoholism later in life? What percentage of the people who did go down the path of addiction later in life do you think started smoking, drinking, or using drugs prior to the age of 18? Your options are 10 to 20%, 30 to 50, 60 to 80, or 90%. What percentage who did go down the path of addiction later in life started experimenting before the age of 18? If you answered 90%, you are correct. 9 out of 10 people who became addicts and or alcoholics started before the age of 18. This is encouraging for what is probably not a very obvious reason, and it's probably concerning for what's a very obvious reason. The concerning part is if we've got people who are not 18 years old yet who are drinking or using, they're making very adult decisions that could negatively affect the rest of their life, or if it's a bad enough mistake, could end their life in that moment. With the amount of counterfeit pills showing up in our state being made with fentanyl, to say that one mistake could be a fatal mistake, that's not an exaggeration. Here is why this is encouraging. If we can get an individual to and past the age of 18 without engaging in that first use of drugs or alcohol, the odds start to swing back in our favor that they will not go down the path of addiction. The later into adulthood that we can delay that first use, the lower the likelihood that they will go down the path of addiction. As a matter of fact, the earlier the age of onset, the higher the likelihood that they will struggle with addiction. And that has to do with something you're going to hear us mention multiple times tonight: brain development. Because the truth is THC, nicotine, alcohol, prescription drugs, street drugs, they affect the developing adolescent brain in a very different and more damaging way than the fully developed brain of an adult. So we talked about the when. Let's talk about the why. Why do kids do this? As people who have preteens and teens yourselves, as people who were preteens and teens yourself at one point, why do kids use drugs? Why do kids use alcohol? You want to answer in the chat box, you can do that. If you want to leave a comment on the YouTube stream, you can do that. If you want to answer to those that you're attending with, go ahead. Why? And understanding why is so important. Now, we could answer this question for the rest of the time that we have here tonight, not give one wrong answer, and not exhaust the entire list of reasons why. There's dozens, if not hundreds of reasons. And they're often very personal, but we'll notice that many of them, not all of them, many of them will fall in the list in the broad categories that you see here on the screen. Peer pressure is one that I hear a lot of adults mention immediately. That's one that we think about a lot. Pop culture and social media influence is a big one that we need to be aware of right now. But there's something that's not on this list that we're going to talk about here in a second, and it is stress. Columbia University Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse did a study with parents and teens a number of years back. And they brought parents in with their children, and they asked the parents question number one: would your child, your teen, not somebody else's kid, would your teen ever use drugs to cope with stress? What percentage of parents do you think were willing to consider that their child might use drugs to cope with stress? Your choices are less than 10%, 20 to 40, use drugs. The ones that answered them. What percentage of those teens do you think said, my number one reason is stress? And you have the same 4 options as last time. What percentage of teens who were using drugs in the Casa Columbia study do you think said, stress is the reason why I'm doing this? 73%. Now, if you look at 7% on the parent and then 73% on the teen, and that is a disconnect in communication. That is a misunderstanding. I've shown this statistic before doing an in-person presentation, and I've had a dad raise his hand, and he said, excuse me, stress? What stress do teens have? He said to me, I go to work. I pay the bills. I pay the mortgage. I have to take my kids to sports practice. I've got real stress. And I said to him, sir, absolutely, we do have adult stress and it is intense, but we have the benefit of adult brain development to help us weather that storm. We have the benefit of adult experience to help us deal with that. I'll take all of you parents back to, let's say, your freshman year of high school. Your face is breaking out, your hormones are fluctuating. There's that girl you like, that guy you like. You're trying to make the football team or the volleyball team. Mom and dad want you to get straight A's and you're not getting them. You don't have the self-identity and self-confidence that you have now. That to a preteen or teen is no less real than our stress is to us. And there's two big layers added on top that most of us as adults on this call didn't have to deal with going through elementary, middle, or high school. Social media and the COVID pandemic. The stresses that come with social media, the cyberbullying, being approached by predators, the pressure to portray a perfect image online, the fear of missing out. And then with the COVID pandemic, kids losing almost an entire full year of in-person school and social connection and extracurriculars and sports, kids losing their graduation or their homecoming or their prom. So when we sit down with our kids and they tell us that they're stressed, we need to validate that and acknowledge it as real, because that respect and the empathy of saying to them, I can understand that what you're going through is stressful for you, that's going to build a bridge to communication. No one of any age likes to be told, you don't have real problems. Your problems aren't real. That will shut them down very, very quickly. Now, another source of substance use, another motivation, another risk factor that we really need to be aware of is trauma. And we have defined it here on this slide for you: a psychological, emotional, and or physiological response to an event or series of events that are deeply distressing or disturbing. This is a list right here of some of the main categories of trauma. Now, trauma can be a risk factor for a number of mental and behavioral health challenges, especially if this trauma occurred prior to the age of 18 and prior to the age of 8. What these are referred to when they occur in the really young years is they're called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And the more that have occurred in combination, the higher someone's ACE score is, the higher they are at risk to turn to drugs or alcohol to try to self-medicate that trauma. And that's why it's so important to get professional help, especially if our kids have experienced trauma. There is no substitute to getting connected to counseling. By the way, an excellent book that I recommend, screen cap this, write this down, find this book. It's called What Happened to You. Now, years ago, if kids were behaving in a way that we as adults found inappropriate or disobedient, or it wasn't the way that we as adults wanted them to behave, the phrase that was often used was, what's wrong with you? We're reframing that when it comes to kids that have gone through trauma or ACEs to the phrase of, what happened to you? Like, I want to understand why you are the way you are. And when you unravel what's happened in these kids' past, no wonder they're behaving in the way that they are, especially if they have not had the chance to heal. So the book is What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry, and it's actually co-authored by Oprah Winfrey. Now, we talked about the when and the why. Let's talk about the what. Let's talk about the substances. It's important to explain that on this marijuana slide, our organization, Not My Kid, is not in the conversation related to medical marijuana. We don't comment on adult use at all. We are in the field of prevention for children and adolescents. And the truth is, the effect of regular THC use on the still developing brain has a significantly different effect than it does in the fully developed brain of an adult. When used regularly in the adolescent or the child brain, the teen brain, tetrahydrocannabinol or delta-9 THC, the active ingredient in marijuana that causes the high, has been shown to cause issues with memory, attention, and learning. We do not see this effect in the fully developed adult brain. So marijuana used by adults and used by kids are two very different things. Now, some of you may be seeing this and thinking, I smoked back in the day. It was really not that big of a deal. Keep in mind one very important difference. Years ago, if someone was smoking marijuana, they were rolling joints, they were doing bong hits, they'd be smoking marijuana somewhere in the 3 to 7% THC range. Now, because some strains have been genetically engineered to have higher THC content, it's not unusual to average, and this is average, 15 to 30% THC. Having said that, we're not meeting kids that are smoking marijuana so much anymore as they are vaping THC concentrates, shatter, dabs, wax, butane hash oil. When they're using one of the concentrated forms of THC you see up top here, it is not unusual to be in the 40 to 90% THC range. They're going to need a very small amount to produce a very profound high, a lot of euphoria from it, which is what they're looking for, but it's going to cause more of the detrimental effects to the developing brain. You see down there below, you can get THC in edibles, you can get THC gummy bears from dispensaries, etc. So what we're looking for now isn't so much rolling papers or bongs, although some kids still use those. We're looking more for things like this: wax pens or dab pens. Dabs themselves look like a sticky amber resin that you can see right here in this picture. You can also buy oil cartridges, which have liquid THC in them, and they can thread onto a pen type vape system. So when it runs out, you just get rid of the cartridge and you thread on a new one. And then finally, the THC concentrate known as wax looks exactly like what it sounds like. It looks like wax. There's also another type of marijuana that we need to be aware of. So when we say THC, when I mention THC or tetrahydrocannabinol, what we're talking about is called Delta 9 THC. Delta 9 is federally illegal, even though it's been legalized in certain states medicinally or recreationally. It remains federally illegal. However, in 2017 or 2018, the 2017 Farm Bill passed, and in it, it designates that anything that has less than a certain percentage of Delta 9 THC, a very tiny amount, under 1%, is considered a hemp product, which is why we're now able to legally get CBD, etc. Well, there is another form of THC called Delta 8 THC. It is federally legal under the 2017 Farm Bill because it has a lower than that legal amount of Delta 9 THC. So if you find products in your child's room that say Delta 8 or D8 on them, it is a form of THC. It's about 1/4 to half as strong as Delta 9 THC. Some adults use this to help them sleep or deal with anxiety, and they don't want the mental effects, the intensity of actual Delta 9 THC. But this is not free of consequences for our kids to use. Now, something I need to say similar on vaping and e-cigarettes to what I said on the THC slide is our organization is not looking to have vapes and e-cigarettes banned when it comes to adult use. These were invented as a harm reduction method or a smoking cessation method for adults, created so that adults could quit their tobacco use, taper down nicotine levels over time, and eventually quit entirely. That is a smoking cessation method. Having said that, we have yet to meet the middle school or high school student who is using these devices to quit smoking. More often than not, it is their entry point into substance use. Years ago, it would typically go in this order: smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, smoking marijuana. What we're seeing now is the order is typically vaping nicotine, vaping THC, and then alcohol in many cases has gotten bumped to number 3. So when we mention vaping or e-cigarettes, we instantly, as parents, grandparents, guardians, as educators, we think of the Juul. This device right here became so popular with middle school and high school students because the black cap you see on the right-hand side, that is the pod or cartridge that came in 3% or 5% nicotine. When it's empty, you take it out and you pop a new one in. They were available in pretty much any flavor you could think of: mango, creme brulee, cherry, cool mint, vanilla, cucumber, you name it. And 80% of kids said the reason they started vaping or using e-cigarettes was the flavor. And adults saw this and said, this design of this device, the flavors, this is being marketed to our kids. We need to do something about this. So in 2019, the United States government banned all Juul pod flavors except for menthol or tobacco. So this essentially killed it off when it came to use by youth, because I don't know a lot of middle school or high school kids who are looking for menthol or tobacco flavor. So society celebrated and parents felt like, okay, this has been dealt with and we don't need to worry about it anymore. Not so fast. Bottom paragraph on this slide, a footnote on page 9 of the flavored vaping ban said that manufacturers can continue to make any flavor they want as long as it is not in a refillable cartridge or pod type system and is in a disposable device that is thrown away when the liquid runs out. Enter the puff bar. Looks just like the Juul, 3% or 5% nicotine, just like Juul, the same rainbow of flavors, and it is actually less expensive. So what we're looking for now are disposables like the puff bar. So Juul is, you're a couple years behind the curve if that's solely what we're fixated on now. There's some kids that still use them and can still get bootleg cartridges, bootleg pods, but what we're really needing to be focused on right now are these disposables. So what we've seen through this experience is if we're waiting for this to be legislated out of existence, if we're waiting for the government to make this disappear, it's not going to happen. We've seen the same thing with drugs and alcohol. They're not going away. That's why I applaud those of you who are tuning in to find out what can we do within our sphere of influence with our own kids, our grandkids, our nieces and nephews, the children we mentor or coach, or kids who are in our classroom. That is where we need to focus our efforts, because that's where and how we can have an impact. Now, I mentioned earlier that kids aren't typically using these to quit smoking. As a matter of fact, according to research from the University of Southern California, teens who vape are 6 times more likely to smoke cigarettes anyway. Whatever reason they start, whether it's curiosity, peer pressure, boredom, flavor, once that nicotine takes hold, nicotine is a very addictive substance. It is very difficult to quit. The withdrawal symptoms are awful. And they find out, man, if I don't have my puff bars, I start getting really irritable. But if I steal my dad's cigarettes and I smoke a cigarette or two, I don't feel that way. They're 6 times more likely to go on to smoke anyway. So this is having a reverse effect of what it was intended to be used for. Where do they come from? 94% of the time online, kids can successfully purchase them because online age verification is a checkbox. So if they have a prepaid Visa from grandma for a birthday, it takes a couple clicks and you can pretty much get a hold of what you're looking for. Also, some vape shops sell them, some smoke shops, sometimes older students will provide them, and sometimes adults will as well. Let me hone in on that top one though for vape shops, and let me give credit where credit is due. There are some vape shops that are doing the right thing, that are absolutely strictly carding and will not sell to minors. We have even had some reach out to us at Not My Kid and say, how do we do the right thing? Can we partner with you? Do we donate money? What do we do? But then there are also other vape shops where they will sell to kids they know are well underage. I've had school resource officers in Scottsdale tell me, we know the vape shops that sell to kids, and they can get some violations on them. They can shut them down and they'll pop back up a couple months later, 3 blocks over. And teen use has increased in the United States 900% in recent years, according to the Department of Health and Human Services. That is not a typo. So what are the dangers? Why does this matter? Number one, nicotine can be addictive to anyone of any age. But here is what we see in youth that we don't see in adults. Issues with memory, attention, and learning. Sounds just like what I said about marijuana and THC, doesn't it? This affects the developing teen brain in a much more damaging way than it does the fully developed adult brain. What about just if they're vaping the flavored e-liquid? Because some kids are just vaping the liquid, even though the majority of kids we're meeting are using nicotine, even though they don't necessarily understand what it is. They like the buzz, but they don't really know what nicotine is. Even just the juice, the e-juice, the e-liquid for flavor purposes, research is showing it can cause lung damage. And for me, the biggest issue is we have a lack of long-term research on this. We have decades of research on alcohol, prescription drugs, street drugs. We can project out if someone doesn't have an immediate health consequence from alcohol, for example. Based on long-term research we have, we can project out, well, 5 years down the road, this might happen. 10 years down the road, you're probably going to deal with this. This is a big question mark because the modern day e-cigarette was first put to market in 2003. We don't have long-term research. We don't have the bodies of research on this. So if a young person, a child, a preteen or teen uses these and doesn't have an immediate consequence, it doesn't guarantee us that they're not going to have a consequence. We also need to talk about over-the-counter drug misuse, especially for those of you who are parents of middle school students and elementary students. There are some high school students who will misuse over-the-counter drugs, but they do it less than middle school and elementary kids because by the time you're in high school, alcohol gets easier to get and illicit drugs get easier to get. So the first one you're probably already aware of is called DXM, dextromethorphan. It is the ingredient in over-the-counter cough medication, Robitussin, etc. If you take DXM in the therapeutic dose, it'll suppress a cough. You drink an entire bottle or multiple bottles, it has a very euphoric effect, and it works as what's called a dissociative drug. It'll make your mind and body feel disconnected from one another. But as you see down here, the dangers of misuse: paranoia, confusion, hallucinations, blurred vision. And here is the biggest one. Sometimes when kids overdose intentionally on DXM to get the high, they will use products that have more than just DXM as the active ingredient. If they have things like acetaminophen and they're taking massive overdoses of that, it can cause organ damage. And there are some DXM containing products that also have an antihistamine in them, which when taken in massive overdose quantities can cause a fatality. Here's one that's a little bit lesser known: diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl. Now, if you take 1 or 2 Benadryl and you've got allergies, it'll help you with your allergies. But if you take dozens of diphenhydramine containing tablets, it will cause full-blown hallucinations and delirium. And I don't mean visual distortions like LSD or psilocybin mushrooms. I mean full-blown delirium. If you get on Google, and I challenge you to do this after tonight, go do a little research and get on Google and look up Benadryl trip reports and read them. They do not sound fun. People talking about insects coming through the walls, snakes coming through the ceiling. But all kids bother to find out is, oh, I can get high off of this, and mom and dad have it in the medicine cabinet. Now, this got really popular in the fall of 2020, especially on the app TikTok, because on TikTok, they had what was called the Benadryl challenge, where kids were challenging each other to take massive overdoses of diphenhydramine and record themselves under the influence of it while they were on TikTok. 2 more over-the-counter drugs to talk about. Number 1 is loperamide. The brand name you're probably familiar with is Imodium AD. It's an anti-diarrhea medication. Now, you take 1 or 2 loperamide, and it'll help you with stomach issues. If you take several of them, it can behave like an opioid-like drug. It can actually partially activate opioid receptors in the brain and cause a high similar to that of opioid painkillers. What you see down there at the bottom, the dangers of misuse include heart damage and a paralyzed intestine. Once again, our young people don't bother to read up on, here is what you're rolling the dice on. They find out, oh, I can get high off of this. So if you are finding multiple empty boxes of these things in your child's backpack or room or desk, it is time to begin a conversation. Now, if you find in their medicine cabinet at home a pack of Imodium AD with 2 things out of the blister pack, two tablets gone, they probably took it for legitimate reasons. But it is when we are finding multiple empty packages that is pointing toward one particular thing, and that is misuse. The FDA is even aware that people are doing this. They're referring to Imodium as the poor man's methadone. Methadone is a drug used to wean people off of opioids. Sometimes people use methadone to get off of heroin, which is an opioid. And so some people use loperamide or Imodium to quit hardcore opioids and taper down over time eventually, but then some kids are using it to get high. Last one over the counter to talk about, Benzodrex. Benzodrex inhalers. These are available at CVS, Walgreens, etc. If you pop the top off and you put it next to each nostril and you inhale, it'll clear up your sinuses, and that's what it's designed to do. However, the active ingredient in it is called propylhexedrine. And if you crack open the container, you will find a piece of cotton soaked with the active ingredient. Some young people swallow it whole or soak it in an acidic liquid, something with a lot of citric acid like lemon juice or orange juice. Get rid of the cotton and then drink it. And it acts like an amphetamine. It acts like a stimulant, like speed. They'll get really amped up, really hyper. Pupils will dilate, tons of energy. It'll interfere with their sleep. They won't feel like eating. But as you see here at the bottom, high blood pressure, potential heart attack, cardiac arrest, etc. So if you've never bought your child one of these and you find one of these Benzodrex inhalers and it's cracked open, it's time to follow up and begin a conversation and find out what is going on. One more category of drugs to talk about before we get into some of our solutions. Prescription drug misuse is the fourth most common after THC, nicotine, and alcohol, the three things that students are typically going to begin with. In the United States, high school seniors are then most commonly moving to prescription drug misuse. And when you're moving from nicotine to prescription drug misuse, you are taking an enormous leap into greater danger. Two main concerns with prescription drug misuse. Number one, it's easy to get. Mom and dad have these painkillers, grandma and grandpa have them, and if they're not locked up, kids can get their hands on them very easily. So we've got to make sure that we lock up our prescriptions and we safely dispose of the ones we no longer need. Concern number two is what's called low perception of risk. When asked, many kids falsely believe that getting high off of prescription drugs is safer than street drugs because what they see is, well, these aren't made in a meth lab. A pharmaceutical company makes them, a doctor prescribes them. My grandma takes these pain pills. This is medicine. This isn't drugs. And as you see right here, according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, since 2003, prescription painkiller overdoses have killed more people than heroin and cocaine combined. We cannot be naive about the dangers. What about in Arizona? Well, in our state, nearly 80% of kids are getting these from friends, family, or right out of the home. What if you were your child's first drug dealer? Think about that for a minute. It sounds crazy, but what if we found out 4 or 5 years from now, our child is addicted to drugs and we sit down and we hear the story and we unravel it and we find out it's from my painkillers, from my surgery or my dental work that I wasn't locking up. We have to lock them up. But friends, family, and right out of the home is common, but we're finding an increasing amount of kids who are purchasing these through Snapchat and through Instagram. If you want to know what is going on in your child's life, look at their social media. Their social media will tell you what they often won't. Snapchat, because the messages you send, the pictures and the videos disappear from the recipient's device once the 10-second timer goes off. When mom and dad search the phone, they can't find that drugs are being bought and sold. And I've met families in Arizona who have lost their children to fatal fentanyl overdoses from counterfeit pills purchased through social media. And that is how we are ending up with kids dying from fentanyl overdoses. Now, we've heard so much about fentanyl over the last decade or so, but if you don't work in medicine or if you don't work in behavioral health or law enforcement, you may not know what it is. So we've created this slide to explain what it is. It is an extremely powerful synthetic opioid designed for people who are cancer patients, post-surgery, people who are in palliative end-of-life care. And what I get asked so frequently is, if it's so dangerous, why are people dying from it? Why are people taking this if it's so dangerous? Your answer is down there in the teal text in the bottom paragraph. The vast majority of people who are dying from fentanyl overdoses do not realize that they are taking it. They are buying what they think are Percocet or Vicodin or OxyContin. They believe they are buying something like what you see here on the screen. But they are ending up with fentanyl because cartels can purchase fentanyl in bulk from China very cheaply, relatively inexpensively, and can use a pill press, and they can make that fentanyl in the shape of any pill that you can think of. They can make it the right shape, the right color, the right branded imprint. And if that person who's using it did not get it directly from a pharmacy, they have no guarantee that it is what they think it is. And it can look like blue 30 milligram oxycodone, which hit Tucson particularly hard and is hitting the rest of the state as well. And here is why it is so deadly. The lethal dose of fentanyl for an average size adult male, 2 to 3 milligrams. Look at this picture. It takes 30 milligrams of heroin to kill an average size adult male. How many things in life can we say are more deadly than heroin? Fentanyl is one of them. This is an area where we have no room for error. We have no margin for error. We don't want our kids using marijuana. We don't want our kids using nicotine. This is a whole other level right here. One mistake can be a fatal mistake. And you see here, Arizona is being hit particularly hard because we are a primary hub for the Sinaloa cartel. We get hit with a flood of these before they get dispersed out through the United States. And it's ending up on campus. 3 students at San Luis High School in San Luis, Arizona were arrested with several thousand pills in their possession. A senior baseball player at Notre Dame Prep overdosed on a fake pill that he bought from a sophomore peer. So what do we look for? This will be in the resources that we will give you the link to. But this is what you are going to look for when it comes to not only fentanyl use, but use of any opioids at all. One shortcut I will point out to you here is constricted pinpoint pupils. If you see your child day in and day out and their pupils are a certain size, and then one day you see them and they are absolutely tiny, like pinpoints, even in low light situations, that can often be indicative of opioid use. Now you see some of the other symptoms in here as well: nodding off, slowed down breathing, slowed down motor skills. And if the dose is big enough, we need to look for the symptoms of fentanyl overdose. Passing out, gurgling or snoring, pale skin with blue around the lips or blue around the fingertips, unresponsive to verbal commands or questions or even a sternum rub. So what do? Number 1, call 911. Call 911 and administer naloxone, brand name Narcan. You can get this without a prescription. You can get this from a pharmacy without a prescription. It is not a controlled substance. It cannot harm someone. Now, if you don't want to get it from a pharmacy, you can get it for free from Sonoran Prevention Works. You see down there at the bottom of the screen, spwaz.org. Sonoran Prevention Works will train you on how to use naloxone. It is a nasal spray that you do 1 spray into each nostril of the person who is passed out, and then you begin rescue breathing. You cannot hurt someone if you give them naloxone and they are not overdosing on opioids. I'm going to explain this science in about the best way that I can, and I'm not a scientist. But when someone overdoses on opioids, what happens is that the opioid receptors in the brain get overcrowded. And when that happens, breathing stops, and that is how fatalities occur. What naloxone does, for lack of a better term, is it clears off those opioid receptors so breathing can resume. If you give Narcan to someone who's not overdosing on opioids, it will do nothing. It will not hurt them at all. And here is why you've heard me say throughout this entire presentation, brain development, brain development, brain development. You've heard me say that all these things we talked about affect our kids differently because their brain is not done developing until 25 years of age or older. And the last part to develop, the prefrontal cortex, is instrumental in controlling impulsive decision-making, anticipating risk, or weighing future consequences. So we can't say, well, my son's a really smart kid or my daughter's a great kid. I believe it. But the best, the brightest, the most loving and conscientious and amazing kids with great parents, kids who go to fantastic schools and live in wonderful neighborhoods, can still make impulsive decisions because there's a lot of pressure, there's temptation. In our state, there's a lot of availability. And because their manager that makes logic decisions is not online yet, knowing that we have to be the prefrontal cortex for our kids. These signs and symptoms are going to be in the resources that we are going to give you. Now, here's a shortcut. You know your kids better than anyone. You know what is normal tone of voice, body language, facial expression, level of eye contact. You know what your kids look like and how they behave. Any of us can have an off day or a couple off days. Maybe you have a couple days or your teen is eating a whole lot and sleeping a whole lot, or their eating has changed, their sleeping has changed. That can be a teenager. But when you are checking off multiple changes in behavior in combination over a prolonged period of time, and your parental instinct is telling you something is going on, that means we need to sit down and begin a conversation, not deny what we are seeing, and sit down and explain to our child how much we love them and that they're not in any trouble, and explain what we've seen, the changes that have made us start this conversation, and let them know, hey, I want to help you. My number one job is to keep you healthy and alive and thriving and safe. And I can't help you if I don't know what's going on. Let's talk about that. And we also need to get familiar with the places that they can hide drugs and alcohol, including in concealment devices that can be bought on Amazon or at smoke shops, Coke can safes, water bottle safes, highlighter pipes, lipstick pipes. The things you see on the screen right here are available pretty much any smoke shop, any head shop. You can order them on Amazon. But what our kids are more likely to be using is improvised paraphernalia that they have created themselves. If you're finding burnt aluminum foil can be used to smoke a variety of things. Below that, you see the old Coke can pipe. Poking holes in a aluminum can can be used to smoke. So if you're finding an aluminum can with holes poked in it and burn marks, it can be used for smoking. Top center, if you're finding cut straws or pens with the inners taken out to where it's just a hollowed out pen tube, those can be used for snorting powders. Get on Google sometime and do about 10 to 15 minutes of research on drug paraphernalia, drug hiding places, drug concealment devices. Because if you're talking to your teen one night, you walk into their room and you can tell they're under the influence, but you can't get an answer from them what it is that they've taken. It's a matter of health and safety to know what it is that they've been using. On one end of the spectrum, it could be we're going to need to have a conversation. Somewhere in the middle, it could be we're going to need to start going to counseling. All the way to if they have taken a counterfeit pill that may have fentanyl in it, it is a trip to the ER as soon as possible. And it's hard to intervene in a problem if we can't locate the source of a problem. We are almost done. We have a few minutes left here before we open it up for any questions, but let's talk about the solutions. First of all, get on the same page with your spouse or partner. If a kid is hearing a unified message from all adults, from all parents in their life regarding the rules and the consequences around drugs and alcohol, that is a protective factor. It lowers the likelihood that they will use. Where a kid getting a conflicting message, different messages from one parent and the other parent, that is a risk factor. They are more likely to use drugs and alcohol. Where do we talk with them? Where do we have these conversations on drugs and alcohol? At the dinner table. Casa Columbia University Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse does an annual study on the importance of regular family dinners, at least 4 days a week, preferably 5 or more, where the devices are put away, the phones are turned off, the TV's turned off, the tablets are put down. And we're looking at each other and we're engaging with one another and we're listening to one another. Families that intentionally, routinely set this time aside, whether it's for dinner or game night or going for a walk, these families have lower rates of teen substance use. Start the conversation early. We mentioned earlier that the average age is 11 to 13. That means in order to be preventative, we need to start talking to our kids about the dangers of drugs and alcohol prior to that age. I started with my daughter, she's 9.5. I started at the age of 2.5, not talking about drugs and alcohol. That's a little too ambitious to be that direct. But we started having conversations about making healthy choices, only putting healthy things in your body. We continued those types of conversations at age 5, at age 7, and I was starting to be more direct about drugs and alcohol. At 9, we've had very direct conversations. But because we planted those seeds at age 2, when I go to have the next round of that dialogue, the response is, Yeah, we've kind of always talked about this. Whereas if you have a high school senior and you go to have that conversation for the first time, you may get a response of, why are we talking about drugs and alcohol? Am I in trouble? This is weird. Why are we talking about this? It doesn't mean it's not going to work, but it's going to take more effort. So lay that foundation early. Number 2, be clear about your rules related to drugs and alcohol. A lot of times we assume, oh, no, my kids know. They already know. Better that we have that conversation again and again and again and again. The temptation and availability and the pressure to use drugs and alcohol is not going to be a one-time thing in our kids' lives. So therefore, the dialogue that we need to have with them to balance out what the world is telling them, that needs to be an ongoing conversation. Understand their brain. Know that they are physiologically wired to be impulsive and take risks. Even the best kids in the preteen and teen years start gravitating toward a riskier behavior if they think it's going to make them feel good, that it's going to get them attention, that it's going to get laughter, or they're going to get clout on social media. Help them develop a personality outside of their social media profile. Help them find healthy coping skills, music, writing, art, sports, martial arts, skateboarding, making beats, journaling, whatever it is that lets them get that stress out naturally, lets them get that dopamine release naturally in a way that's not harming them or harming someone else. If they are using drugs or alcohol, sit down with them and find out why. Knowing the answer to why can begin to point us in the direction of a solution. Is there something missing in their life? Do they have undiagnosed depression that they were trying to self-medicate? Is there something that we can do to change that? The answer is often yes. Give them a way out of a risky situation. Agree on a code phrase they can text you and you will come and get them, no questions asked. Now, no questions asked doesn't mean that if you need to apply correction later that you don't do it. What it means is if they're at a party and drugs and alcohol start circulating and they want to get out of there, get them out of there. If they've already drank or used at a party and they're about to pass out, we need to get them out safely. If they're about to get behind the wheel of a vehicle and they're under the influence, we need to get them out safely. The way this works is you agree on a code phrase that your child can text you, and when you get it, you know that means you need to come get them out of a dangerous situation. Now, kids like this because it's not a phone call, because if they dial us and they're like, Mom, I need you to come get me, they lose face with their peers. Their peers can be like, oh, is mommy rescuing you? Whereas if they see our child texting us this, it doesn't look like anything. Did I leave the eye or not? It could be something like that. When you call back, you need to know where they are. So I know some parents that call back with the scenario of, where are you? You had 6 chores you were supposed to do. None of your homework's done. I need to come get you. And then be like, oh man, I'm in trouble with my dad. This is something that I am such a huge fan of. And you know what? If they take you up on this, even if you pick them up and they're high, they're under the influence, they've made a massive mistake and there needs to be correction later. In the moment where they chose to be honest with you and say, this is what I did, this is what happened, and they gave you the opportunity to come get them out safely, I cannot encourage you enough. Tell them, I am proud of you for choosing to let me know and have me come get you. I respect the fact that you did that. Doesn't mean that later on there won't be correction, but in that moment say, thank you. I really respect that you chose to give me a call. Decide on consequences together. When you're working on your family prevention plan and you're writing down the rules and you're writing down the consequences and the corrections, ask them, here's the rules. What do you think should happen if you break these rules? Now, they may come up with something that you hear and you think, that's way better than what I came up with. What often resonates with young people are immediate short-term consequences that click in the world that they exist in. And most of them start with the letter C. Credit card, cash, cell phone, curfew, computer, car. Credit card, cash, cell phone, curfew, computer, car. The gaining or maintaining of that privilege for meeting your expectations, or the loss or restriction of that privilege for violating your expectations and your agreement. And the final 2, and we're almost done here, we'll take questions in a second. Keep communication lines open. Do everything you can do to stay connected to your child. even if they are raising their voice to us, which we don't want, it is still preferable to a child who shuts down, disconnects, isolates, and we can't get anything from them. That is a scary place to be. Allow them to come to you and you listen. We listen with empathy, respect, validation, and without judgment, and then get connected to professional support. Visit notmykid.org and click on behavioral health. You can fill out a pre-screening form. Whatever you do, do not fight your battles alone. If your child has begun experimenting with drugs or alcohol, it doesn't mean that we failed as parents. It doesn't mean that they're a bad kid. Amazing kids can give in to the pressure and temptation because there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of temptation. There's a lot of availability. And in our state, there's a lot of affordability of drugs and alcohol. And I will paste in the chat box these resources. Number one, you see right here, notmykid.org/SA. That is where you can find our substance use strategies page, including our family substance use prevention plan. We are coming in at time right now, so I want to pitch it back to Katie to answer any questions that you may have that have been sent in earlier, or any questions that anyone else may have as well.
We don't have any Slido questions right now, but I just wanted, you dropped some resources in the chat. I know of a book called The Addiction Inoculation by Jessica Lahey. That's a newer release. And then there's a film that you and I have shown before called The First Day that is available. It's $9.99 to download from the firstdayfilm.com website. Madison actually did a screening of it last spring. It's an excellent movie for families to watch, I would say 5th through 8th grade on up, but on just decision making as it relates to drugs and alcohol. So looking at the questions that I had posed for you, your presentation was so thorough that it actually covered all of the questions that I have here. Michelle, Edie, do you want to add anything as we close out?
I just wanted to say thank you for presenting this. And we know that we have a lot of viewers tonight, but then we also have a lot of viewers that watch our program later on. And I think you've provided a lot of really good resources. And thank you for the reminder that when young adults struggle through difficult decisions, sometimes they need a way to just contact their parents in that moment, and for that really clear and specific reminder. Thank you, Shane, for being here. Just a quick plug, because I know we're over an hour for our listeners who are going to log in and who are here tonight. Our last program, our 6th programming in our Thrive series, is about a month from now. It's May 12th, and it's all called Summer, Planning for Our Summer and Mental Health. And we're going to be together again. And Shane, just to say, if parents want additional resources from Not My Kid, we've got it here on the screen from your organization. And I know from my own experience that we've reached out to you many times, and your organization has always met the call. So thank you. Thanks for being our guest this evening. With that, we're going to sign off. But once again, thank you, Katie. Thank you, Shane and Edie from Madison, from all of us. Good evening and good night.
Thank you.